Hi everybody and welcome. My name is Maddie and we are at the Fostering Success Michigan Community Collaborative. This month we are in Ann Arbor, or in Ypsilanti, and we are focused on housing. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our audience here for joining us. I am going to go ahead and have the panel introduce themselves. And Bree, I will start with you.
My name is Breezy Simmons. I'm a UCTA scholar at Western Michigan University, and then I'm also an FSM ambassador for Fostering Success Michigan.
Hi, my name is Elazar Norton. I'm a student at Washington Community College in the REACH program.
Hi, my name is Dave Selmer. I'm the more support therapist for Ozone House, a nonprofit in Washtenaw County.
My name is Shantae Harris. I actually sit on the board of Ozone House and I'm on a Continuum of Care board here in the county, and I'm an academic advisor and success coach at Washtenaw Community College.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for joining us. For our GoToMeeting audience and our Facebook Live audience, they didn't get the chance to watch Shantae's TED Talk, but we'll make sure that that gets posted. But one of the things, we have a whole list of questions, we'll get into those. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was the number that you spoke about with 58,000 students nationwide experiencing homelessness. And I know recently there was a study out of California that said within, I think it was the California State University system, that there are 1 in 5 students that they found that were experiencing some element of housing instability or homelessness. And it's such a prevalent issue and something that I think we don't necessarily see or we don't necessarily think about. And so I'm interested kind of for each of you, if you can share maybe something that helped for you to kind of get this on your radar, or how you are sort of making a point to see students who may not necessarily be seen with this experience. And Shantae, I'm going to start with you because you did do the TED Talk. So.
Yeah, so that 58,000 homeless college students number came from roughly from FAFSA numbers a few years back. So even that's not going to be a great number. Some of the numbers that you just talked about from California and the Wisconsin Hope Lab also do a lot of studies on this, and those numbers are probably getting more accurate. And those are the big scary ones that I talked about, like the 50% of college students. But oddly enough, this didn't get on my radar from me experiencing this. It wasn't until later I worked at a youth runaway shelter in Flint that is pretty much the same thing that Ozone House is here in this county. And when working for that program and starting to learn more about, because we were HUD funded, and learning more about how the HUD dollars come in and who is considered homeless, and working with young people, those residents that I worked with there were ages like 10 to 20 roughly. And it was through all that learning that I realized that what I had experienced a couple years prior was actually considered homelessness. And I was like, oh wow, well I guess that was me back then. And so it was really like just kind of accidentally getting a job in the field. And then once I started working with our clients, I was sold. So, and I have not left that field ever since.
Awesome. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, similarly to what Shantae had said, so I've been at Ozone House since 2009, and I'd say this issue has become much more visible to me through my work there. So for those who aren't aware, Ozone House is a nonprofit. We specifically work with youth, generally ages 10 to 20, although the more support program that I'm the therapist for, that flexibility is a little bit later age. But a lot of the services we provide are around housing. And so seeing both in grade school and in college, housing instability or homelessness that maybe doesn't look like what people typically think of when they hear the word homeless, right? So couch surfing, being doubled up in housing. So I'd say, like, through my work, I've become much more aware, for sure.
So my experience, like you said, from California, I actually moved from California, and it's like the cost of living over there is so expensive that it's kind of hard if you don't have supports to really support yourself to go along with it. And then it's like once I found out what homelessness actually meant, it kind of changed my view on it, because like when I was 17, I was homeless, and then I was homeless again when I was like 19, but I didn't realize that my number technically like tripled if I considered couch surfing. And I didn't really take that into consideration. And then kind of the more I talk about it, it kind of make other people aware that that's what homelessness is.
Thanks for sharing.
I think going off of him, one, I think I learned a lot about homelessness through working at FSM and like digging more into the work, not just from my experiences, but from others. And then I also am a mentor for students with experience in foster care. So I think that has really opened my eyes to like you said, couch surfing being a form of homelessness or just unstable housing or unsafe housing. And so the work that I'm doing now as a mentor, I'm really seeing that it's affecting the students that are coming in with experience in foster care. And so for me, it's just supporting them in the best way that I can. But that's how I've seen it within my work.
Awesome, thank you. You know, I think, so one, you guys sort of did my work for me because you explained like all of the different definitions of the experience of homelessness. And coming into this work, my background is working in child welfare in foster care and sort of knowing, okay, sure, some young people that I worked with experienced homelessness, before they were in care, maybe even after they exited care, but not really realizing how prevalent it was. And then not thinking forward about how challenging just maintaining stable housing can be for a young person moving into that more independent living part of their life. And even at a college campus where I think those of us who work on a college campus, think that if there's housing around, students must just be in it, and that's not necessarily true. I really kind of go back to the McKinney-Vento definition that identifies homelessness as a lack of safe, adequate, and predictable housing. So when you think about, is this safe? Is this adequate? To a standard where you can live, you can thrive, you can be healthy, and is this predictable? I think then all of a sudden we go, oh, a lot more people that we know might be experienced or have experienced homelessness. And I think that really helps us bring it home, so that it's something that we can really think about of like, oh yeah, okay, so I see how that might have shown up, or that's showing up for students that I know. And I think about for students who, are younger, maybe on the college access side, a lot of times we hear some of those questions around going to college, the expense, all of these things. And a huge part of that is, how do I maintain housing, right? And I'm curious for our professionals on the panel, maybe how you work with students around that question of how do I find housing, how do I maintain housing, when balancing all of these other things, just ideas that you all have.
Yeah, actually, it's I was running late to get here today because a student stopped in my office and was crying, telling me that she wasn't sure where she was going to live over break, and I was like, "That's fitting if I'm late for this event on housing."
Absolutely. Please be late for that.
Yeah, so I was like, "I think you'll understand." But yeah, it was just so fitting with this conversation because it just happens so frequently, and it is difficult. And Elazar talked about housing being expensive in California, which of course it is, and here in Washtenaw County, housing is really expensive too. So it's really hard for us to work with students and that are experiencing this, just because there's a lot of things, including not just the fact that housing is expensive, but like this particular student and most of my students don't have someone that can co-sign for a lease with them, or they don't have money for a security deposit, or if they've been evicted before, they probably are not going to get approved for anything, even with some of those, even with a co-signer and a security deposit. So it just becomes like, right now this particular student is staying at home with family, but it's not safe, predictable. And so we're just trying to think of, okay, you've got some family members out west, like, can you stay with them for the summer until you can come back? And she's at Washtenaw Community College and saying, okay, when you come back, we're going to have you apply for EMU and hopefully you can get housing at EMU. And then we're just going to load up on scholarships. And it's just, there's not even one answer. And it always has been really frustrating for me because I feel like I have been immersed in this work I started my shelter in 2009 too, like you mentioned. And I'm like, if I don't know where to send them, then how could anyone else, if they stopped at anyone else's office? And there's just not a great answer. We just try to like cobble together as much of a plan as we can and just get them from semester to semester or month to month or week to week, and so they can try to stay in school.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a great point. So resources, right? So we cobble together what plans we can, knowing your community resources, but also advocating for more resources, right? So funding, what funding is there to create more programs? So Maddie, what you brought up, I think, is something that people don't think about is what about students who don't have anywhere but the dorms to live? So during the semester, they have somewhere to live, but what happens if their grades are such that they're on academic probation? What happens if they're withdrawn from classes? Then where do they go? And so even if they have somewhere to stay, then that adds a layer of stress that can impact school, impact mental health. And so I think that's important to always keep in mind. In terms of this for professionals, I think really, as I said, becoming aware of what resources are out there. So working at Ozone House, I have a pretty fair concept of both I know what our agency can provide, but also I'm pretty familiar with community resources in this area. And so I think making yourself familiar, really building your connections. So building connections with landlords. I know the case managers at Ozone really do a great job working with landlords and finding out which are the landlords that will rent to a young person who has evictions on their record, right? And there's not a lot of them. But really figuring that out and just trying to partner with agencies and with private individuals to try and meet those needs. But again, a lot of times that's not official. And so you're trying to piece together plans. And if somebody doesn't have anywhere to go, I mean, that's going to impact their housing. And so the longer it takes to piece together that plan, the harder it is on the school piece.
Yeah. And I think to that point, you know, for those of us that work with students, we know that the longer it takes to piece together a plan, sort of the less and less chance we have of a student staying with us, because other things become competing priorities, as of course they would for anybody. And so it is this fine balance of, can we move quickly but effectively, and not always kind of be in crisis management. And I think housing, you know, of all the 7 life domains, to me, housing is the domain that I feel the least knowledge about, but also I feel like we have the most work to do in just really addressing those issues so that we can do it in a comprehensive way. It's not just semester to semester or summer break to summer break, you know. Thank you for bringing up the point about summer or spring break housing and summer break housing. I think that those are some of the small ways that we don't necessarily think about how homelessness may show up for a student that in our minds we're thinking are, you know, for all intents and purposes, pretty stable once they get to post-secondary education. And for Elazar and Bree, I'm curious for you, you know, prior to going to college, so in that kind of pre-college phase, how were you supported to plan for or around housing? Was that something that was talked about, or and if it was, how was it addressed? And if it wasn't talked about, why do you think that might be? That's a big question. I don't know who wants to go first. Bree, do you want to go?
Sure, I'll start first. So for me, I was actually staying with a friend because I got kicked out, so I was homeless. So I was staying with a friend before college. So I had to scrap together and pull my own boots by my straps and like go on the internet and do all this calling around and do all this stuff to figure out if I could even still go to college, how I was going to get there, like how was I going to pay for the dorm. So I think myself luckily pulled myself up on my bootstraps at that point to get myself to college. But then once I got there, my campus support program, the Cedar College program, ensured me, you know, we're going to apply for YT, we're going to apply for ETB, we're going to apply for MET, all these things that would get me that stable and safe housing. And so I started it, but I definitely wouldn't have been able to keep it up myself. And so with their help and their support, I was able to stay through all 4 years. And even after my first semester, or my first year, I was like, oh, is there any chance I can maybe stay on campus for half the summer or for the whole summer, you know, just so that I could make those permanency plans with the people I was calling my family to be able to stay there. And so I think support from campus support programs and then me just hustling to get it done.
Yeah, so for me, when I graduated high school, I was 17, but I was living with my grandparents then, and it became a very I don't know, it's just hard to be in the house because my grandparents were fighting and then they kind of went through a divorce at that time. So I didn't really want to be there. So at that time I reached out to my aunt like my plan was to go to community college and then transfer to a 4-year. So I moved in with my aunt the summer after I graduated, and then I found out that she kind of had some mental instabilities, and then it wasn't stable for me to be there. And then my grandmother was resentful of me for leaving, so then I didn't really have anywhere to go. So then I was kind of like couch surfing for a couple of weeks, and then eventually she let me back in, but then it was kind of like, I'm about to kick you out at any moment, so it was kind of very unstable, and that went on for about a year. So I mean, I didn't really have any plans. I mean, I had plans, but they kind of fell through and didn't kind of work, so.
Yeah. So you guys both spoke to the hustle, right? Like you're doing your hustle and you're doing both of you actually did quite amazing work to like access your resources. What resources do you have? You know, Elzer, you talked about like, okay, I'm going to call this to people in my family. I'm going to keep it moving, you know. Also recognizing within that you were able to recognize like, okay, I need a place to stay, but also is this a healthy place to stay? You know, which kudos to you, because I think that's a lot of work to do as like a 17 and 18-year-old. So that's amazing. And Bree, you know, for you to be with a friend, know kind of for thinking like, I need to make a plan to get to college so that I can get to the housing part. And then once you were there, having a campus support program that can help you and that you are willing to receive that help. You know, it's a two-way street. You ask for it, you have to be willing to receive it too. So having that, you know, kind of experience. But also, again, recognizing like it's not just a one and done. Like, I'm here, it's taken care of. No, there's sort of the continual check-in on this. So I'm curious for the two of you, what do you wish the, you know, professionals or maybe supportive adults either in your life, what do you wish that they had done or helped you with? You know, as you, especially in the pre-college side, kind of making your way. That's a big transition, leaving high school and going into post-secondary education. Are there things that people could have done that, you know, or people, folks in the audience, folks who are listening, that you would say, hey, you know, somebody had done this, or if you do this, that makes a difference?
So I would say that promoting self-advocacy is a big deal, because it's kind of, if you don't fight for yourself, then it's hard for other people to fight for you. I mean, they can, but if you're not willing to take it in yourself, then doesn't go as far. So for me, that was a big step for myself, because I mean, I believe I can do whatever I want to do, but it's kind of deciding in what do I actually want to do that. And then once I figure that out, it kind of just becomes easier. And then the other thing is, yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I think just to add to that, supporting them while they're doing what they want to do. So you like let them know that they should stand up for themselves and they should be a self-advocate, but then also standing right there supporting them while they're doing that. Mm-hmm. So if they have that, oh, I don't really know, you're like, no, we're going to do this. You're going to do it, but I'm right here like on the back end. So
I was going to say, when you said supporting them and saying, no, you're going to do this. Yeah. And I was like, Marie, how would that have worked for you at 18?
I don't know.
But what you said was, I'm just going to be here,
right.
Which I think is actually what people and professionals, you know, need to think about. Is like, it's actually not about telling a student, you're going to do this, just do this, you know, and it'll be okay. It's actually about like having their back, being there with them, helping them learn how to do things like advocate for themselves, not necessarily telling and then walking away, right? Because you're 18, you don't want people to tell you what to do, you know? So for our professionals, I'm curious to know, kind of similarly, what are things that you as a professional have learned that you feel like, you know, this is something that actually significantly makes a difference in how I am able to support students that are experiencing homelessness or housing instability?
You got it.
So I think, first of all, listen to the students, right? So talk to them and find out what they want, what their goals are, and then using your professional connections and expertise, provide education and connect to resources, and then be a support for them as they work towards that. I think knowing what their goals are is so important. So I would say to start to listen. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I would echo all of those things, and also just being really knowledgeable about the resources that are out there, because they're not. a ton, but there are, especially for youth that are transitioning out of foster care, there's quite a few. And even for students that were not in the foster care system but are still experiencing homelessness, there are some resources out there. I had someone contact me recently who was working with a student who was homeless, and they were filling out the student's FAFSA, and I was like, there's a box to check now for that, and I was like, and do that, and we help that student get independent student status for their FAFSA, which means they don't need to use their parents' tax information, and that's huge, and that didn't used to be easy to get, and now you can, but a lot of people don't know about that. Like, I've gone through some schools, colleges' websites to see if their financial aid pages say that, and a lot of times they don't, so it's something that you just kind of have to know, and we rarely do, but I think just knowing the resources that are out there is a big part of the battle, so you can just connect your students easier when and if that time comes.
Would you share a little bit about the FAFSA box, since you brought it up? You know, and a lot of folks may be familiar with question 53 on the FAFSA, which is specific to students with experience in homelessness, students with experience in foster care. I don't think people realize that there's also a question around homelessness, and so you know, often we actually talk with students, and we're usually talking with, you know, maybe high school counselors or other advocates in that arena, and they're saying, well, the student was in foster care, but they're not now, and they're not meeting the foster care definition because they, you know, had whatever happened, but now they're actually couch surfing. What can we do? You know, and it's this big question of like, here's this in-between area, and I think knowing about the resources would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So there is a way that you can indicate now in the FAFSA that that student is experiencing homelessness, and it actually says and at risk of homelessness too, which is kind of vague a little bit. And so that's really helpful. And a lot of times so many campuses now have coaches on their campus that work with students that are experiencing foster care, and some of those offices also service students that are experiencing homelessness, and a lot of times that flags the financial aid office to notify those folks on campus. So that just helps students get connected to resources as well. But there's also, students don't realize that they can there's a way to get designated, like to get a status designated as like you're considered homeless. There's not really an easier way to say it. And so you can get that designation from, if you're working with a program like Ozone House, you can get it from, so it can be like a runaway homeless youth shelter. It can be just like any HUD shelter pretty much can do this. And if a student is not affiliated with either of those organizations, the financial aid office administrators can help with that as well. So it's like homelessness verification basically, and then that can help override to get the independent status. And for a lot of students that are having these problems, I mean, that being considered an independent student for financial aid purposes is huge, because first of all, if you are estranged from your family or you don't have family for whatever reason, then you don't need to use their tax information. But also, you usually end up being eligible for more financial aid, so unsubsidized and subsidized loans. And so there's a lot of benefits. But I think all of us up here we talked about discovering later that what we were experiencing was considered homelessness. So if you don't know that couch surfing is considered homelessness, then you're not going to check that box. And if the people working with you don't know, that they're not going to tell you to check that box. So it's just being knowledgeable about. And some of it's dry. I mean, like I said, I'll have to get to do with Care Board and some of the HUD stuff. Like, it's not fun, but like knowing what the HUD definitions are and understanding like what, you know, the full picture of what homelessness means, and then how whatever definition the student is meeting, like what resources are, you know, connect with that definition.
Yeah. Well, and I think so just to tie in, especially on the K-12 side, we now have foster care liaisons under the Every Student Succeeds Act. Many of you are in the room, and a lot of you are also McKinney-Vento liaisons, as it happens. And so this is, you know, these are a group of people who actually can help to identify those students and make sure that they are accessing resources. And I think a lot of people just don't know that there's folks in the school districts and ISDs that are there to help with some of that identification. And that it also doesn't mean something bad is going to happen to you, which, or your family, that like there's really just the opportunity to have more resources, which I think is something that we don't say often enough. I'm going to pause and see if are there questions. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the McKinney-Vento / foster care liaison position that a number of us hold. I'm just curious, is there a similar position at the college level? Is there a McKinney-Vento or HUD liaison that can help students with this and broker and make that connection so that students can get their needs met with as little cost as possible?
I'm like looking at one of our campus coaches in the audience. I won't put you on the spot. No, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. So the question is, are there support folks in the post-secondary side to help support students that are experiencing homelessness, that experience foster care? So we can talk a little bit about campus coaches, and I'm curious actually for our students maybe to speak to how maybe the programs that you are part of and how they have supported you. And so Elazar, if you wouldn't mind talking about the WCC REACH program.
Yeah, so the REACH program, which is headed by Kathy, she's really great. Like, she helped me just connect with different resources like Dave right here. So when I was homeless back in March of last year, I was sleeping in my car, and then through Dave and Ozone, they're able to help me get my down payment. And then through another member I met in the group, she knew a landlord who actually works with the Magic program at EMU, and he rents out to students who have been in foster care, and then actually does like a prorated rate for us. So so it just, for me, it's about like networking, and then the more people you talk to, you can kind of, hopefully someone will be able to help you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Bree, how about you?
So at the Cedar Scholars Program at Western, there's campus coaches, so luckily, angels. And so they literally sit you down and they say, oh, housing, are you having trouble? Let's look up the resources. And then another great person that I don't know if every program has, but we have a DHHS liaison that is on our campus for us. And so her I go to a lot, and I'm like, hey, I need this help with this down payment. Like, can you help me? Are there funds that I get that I can use? And so those two combined are like superpowers and super angels, and usually get it done for me. And so highlighting them and thanking them for the work that they do. But that's like the main support is the campus coaches and the DHHS liaisons that are on the campus.
Yeah.
So.
And I'll say Michigan has 16 campus-based support programs representing 17 institutions. I believe we have 10, am I going to get this right? Like 10 4 years and 8 2 years, or 7 2 years. So we have some breadth, and they're spread apart. Some of those programs, maybe about half, they do serve students with experience in homelessness and students with experience in foster care. Their primary objective is students with experience in foster care, but we know there's so much intersection for our students that some of the programs have been able to find additional funding to extend their services. I always tell folks that even if the program is not able to serve students with experience in homelessness, that the campus coach programs are some of your best bets for resourcing on the campus. There are a number of financial aid officers that are doing and are aware of McKinney-Vento, that they are able to sort of attend to the specific pieces around homelessness. That's a piece that we definitely, really try to connect and bring in. But I would say, kind of maybe just a blanket statement, is we made a lot of progress on the side of post-secondary around support for students with experience in foster care. Not as much or as maybe organized around that work for students with experience in homelessness. So that's definitely something that we are looking at and working to build allies with. And for the two of you, I don't know if you have things to add.
Yeah, so actually, I mentioned that I sit on the Continuum of Care board here in Washtenaw County, and Continuum of Care is like a HUD mandated body that sort of, I guess, administers HUD funding, and the Continuum of Care applies for grants for HUD, and the money gets funneled to organizations like Ozone House and other shelters in the community. And right now we're in the process of applying for a grant through HUD that's called the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Grant, and there's only 11 awards, 11 awards to be awarded throughout the country. So we're probably, our chances are super great, but throughout going through this process of applying for the grant, like a couple of things we have to do is, one is doing a resource map. So pretty much what we're gonna be sending out a big survey to anyone, probably a lot of you in this room, so I'll be, I'll be looking for that. But to figure out like who's doing what for what population of students, what definitions are you using, just to get like a clear picture. And so the resource map is the resource map is the first part, and then the next part is like a systems mapping to figure out like if a student presents at Eastern Michigan University and says that they're homeless, what are all of the steps that they're going to go through until they're like released, until they exit the system into stable housing, and where are the holes, which the holes being the most important part. And for a lot of students, like there is like kind of a drop off between when they leave a K through 12 system and they're working with a McKinney-Vento liaison and getting to a college, even if there is a college where there's a college campus. Like it's easy if someone's, you know, in like maybe at Ypsilanti school and then they come to WCC and then they go to EMU. Like there's a lot of communication there, but students come from all over the place. So a student that ends up at EMU might not have gone to high school in this county, and likely didn't go to high school in this county. So there's just a lot of places to drop off. So through that process, we're hoping that that's going to help us identify a lot of those gaps and those holes, because like you said, like we don't quite have the resources here. And to be honest, with a lot of the work that I do with students experiencing homelessness, like I borrow a lot from the Fostering Success Michigan and other programs like it, because there's just not as much literature and research out there for homelessness in general among young people.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think just kind of touching on the piece that was talked about earlier, networking. So everybody's been talking about networking and making sure that students are networked and supporting them insofar as they need it, and getting connected to financial aid, getting connected to these key people on campuses that know, kind of have like that specific knowledge around applying for certain scholarships, what does the school have to offer, getting connected to the community resources. So the networking piece is so important.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times there's resources that are out there that people don't know about and aren't being used and could be used. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yes, the networking piece is so huge. You know, the mapping, you know, it's part of why we have a network map in your handouts, because we know that it is one part what you know and one part who you know. And the reality, I think, is it's actually probably like 70% who you know, because we all know, like, if you know me, then I can kind of do all these things. But if you don't know me, I don't know that I can help you, you know? And so definitely like staying close to that network. And then I would say extending that network to your students. You know, one of the things that I heard you say, Elazar, was that there was somebody in your group that told you about a landlord, you know, and so some of that is like peer-to-peer interaction, peers telling, you know, professional supportive adults so that they can tell other students. So extend that network to your students so that they can also share those resources with each other. I did want to say that's awesome that you guys are pursuing the youth homelessness demonstration grant. Michigan is super fortunate in that Grand Traverse County is also a site for that. And so there are lots of resources, and they're kind of building a model up in that area. And so that's something that hopefully we'll be able to learn from. But, you know, I think that also points to Michigan is really trying to be ahead of the curve on this and really like promote how can we leverage what we have and collaborate around these issues that we know they're not going away, you know. I think I saw another question.
Yes, and I just had a question about the networking and collaborating. I heard you, Shantae, talk about the resource maps. Will those also include landlords who's willing to help with evictions, that type of information?
Yes.
How long will it be before that's something that's available to everybody?
I have a call after this with the people that are putting the survey together for us. So about you guys see my car on the phone. So then we're just getting the survey ready right now. And the group at University of Michigan is helping us put the survey together, and we have a giant spreadsheet that has some of your names. It's kind of funny on that list. So the survey will be going out soon, and then hopefully it's not good. The grant is due in the middle of April, so we're moving pretty quickly, but we're hoping that there'll be something tangible here not too long after.
Okay, and there's nothing going around now that's similar to that?
Not really, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, there's like a little.
There's pockets.
Yeah, pockets. Yes, that's a great way to say
I
it.
chair the CLC board that she's on.
Yes.
I'm also the chairman of the Ypsilanti Housing Commission.
Yeah.
Oh,
And there's Ann Arbor Housing Commission, Ypsilanti Housing Commission are both looking at ways to set aside slots for youth experiencing homelessness. So there are all these little pockets, but she is spearheading the COC getting together and officially applying, and Ozone's been shouldering a lot of the responsibilities, so there's a movement afoot for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I think that shows like it really starts with people recognizing and actually taking ownership. You know, let's be honest that you have to take ownership and say, okay, I'm not just gonna go, this is such a big issue, I can't handle it. You know, like, which I think with housing is one of those things that you really can be tempted to do, because it can be an overwhelming thing to think about all of the resources and how do we make sure, and for our students, how are they getting these resources? And then making sure that I gave you that resource, but did that actually work out, you know? So it is cool to see, like, from a grassroots movement, this growing, and hopefully this time next year we'll be like, and this is what they learned, you know? So it'll be really, really cool things. Thank you,
We're
guys.
even looking at acquiring properties and rehabbing them with Habitat, the Zips Landing Housing Commission,
Yeah,
specifically for college students. So
that's awesome.
we have more flexibility to do that. We have our own funds, but
Sure.
it's just a matter of partnering with someone to help us do the services side. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of, like I said, little movements, but
Yeah.
at least there's movement now. People are recognizing that it's an issue.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it speaks to some of the diversity of who you network with, right? Like, I can say that sometimes I get in this spin where, like, I'm just talking to educators and social workers, and we're all like, yeah, this is a big issue, da 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 da. And then we kind of go like, wait, who else do we need to bring in? We need to bring in people from the business community. We need to bring in our politicians. We need to bring in our advocates. Like, there are a larger network of folks that need to come into these issues. And then we need to see it from all sides. We need to see it from post-secondary, but we also need to see it from K-12, so we know how these are getting connected, and some of those holes that you talked about that students are experiencing. And I think ultimately we need to have, like the two of you, students with lived experience, to kind of keep us real, keep us grounded, and go like, yeah, you guys talk like that, but that's actually not how it works out, you know. Other questions? Any questions out in the ether out there? Okay. So I want to come back to our students. And, you know, we've talked a lot about some of the challenges that come along with having experienced homelessness, making your way to and through post-secondary education. I would also love to hear some of the strengths that you all have. From your experience, your diversity of experiences, what are some of the strengths that you have that you feel have really made the difference, have really helped you, you know, come to a place where you have stable housing, feel stable in this housing domain?
So for me, it comes down to like resilience, because like times can seem very grim and seem very bad, but as long as, you know, I kept my chin up, it seemed to kind of get better, you know, it kind of like divot in and out. So it's just, as long as I'm resilient, it was pretty good. And then also it's like, so one of the first counselors I talked to when I was in foster care talked about how you have to talk about your difficulties, kind of, and just being able to talk about it and voice it, even though sometimes it may not be able to be resolved immediately. As long as, like, once it's out there in the world, it's kind of not bottled up, and then it can kind of like bounce around, and maybe other people can hear about it, or people want to help you when they hear about your difficulties usually. But if you don't talk about it, then it kind of just never really goes anywhere. So for me, it was kind of, as long as I was able to talk about it, and then one way or another, through God or whatever you believe in, it kind of works out. So.
Awesome, thank you.
I echo that. I was going to say resilience, but now I'll just say grit. It's sort of the same thing that I didn't want to repeat. But yes, I think grit definitely, no matter how many times you get knocked down, then you're getting back up. And then a smart person once told me, I don't know all the answers, but the internet might. If the internet doesn't, I know someone who does. So I'm like the internet queen. I will Google till the day I die. And so through Googling and calling and talking to people who might not know again, but they can get me to a site that can lead me to another site, that can lead me to another site. So not only being the queen of internet now, I think I'm getting pretty good at the whole grit thing and kind of moving through. And that comes through, again, being resilient and talking to those people and asking for help and taking the hard no, but taking the, okay, you don't know, can you get me someone who does? Or like, how do I get to someone who does? So I think for me, just learning how to move through even when it's hard and like not let that get me stuck is one of the great things that I've learned from my experience.
So I love that you guys both talked about like staying in forward motion. And I hear this from so many of our students. And I'm always like, yeah, but how? How did you learn this? And so I'm just wondering, like, because I think I hear this from a lot of our students who are older, who, maybe are in college or they're working. And I always think, like, at what point did that make sense to you? When people were like, just keep trying, was there something that you can say, like, this was a turning point when I said, I'm just going to keep doing this? Or was it something that was just always within you, just kind of the way that you were? Do you have any kind of thoughts about where the resilience or the grit comes for either of you?
That's a deep question.
I know, we're having like deep thoughts today on the panel.
For me, I think I was always taught to just try hard. Like, it doesn't matter really whatever it is that you're doing. You should just like give your heart, and if it doesn't work out, that doesn't work out. But at least you gave your all. And and then also I saw that people who didn't really try didn't get what they wanted, and it's just like, if I try, I usually get what I want. So why not give it my all?
I think bouncing off that, I've seen so many people just kind of like lose that hope and give up. And I saw the result of that, and I was like, oh no. I was like, I'm going to keep going no matter what, because I want something better for myself. So I think for me, it was watching the experiences of my biological family and friends and just the neighborhood and community that I grew up in Detroit. So just all of that, I was just like, no, like I wanted something more for myself. So I think seeing it hurts you just as much as if it was you. So to avoid that, you kind of like push yourself to do whatever you can to make it. Because, I mean, like you said, what's going to hurt if you work hard and try? So
I think that's awesome. And, I think really you guys should both feel very proud of yourself that, you not only have just been like, okay, I'm going to keep trying, but you've actually accomplished quite a bit with that trying, and that you really are an example for so many other students, and especially our younger students who are coming up who may feel like, what's the point in even thinking about college, because like I'm homeless right now, like there's no way, and to know like, okay, so that it doesn't just always have to be like how it is right now, for sure. Shantae and Dave, I'm curious kind of on the flip side for you all as professionals. You talked about networking, you talked about listening with students. Just what are maybe some things that you guys try to maybe call out or pull out with your students when you're working with them, kind of keep them working towards some of these goals when it can be such a challenge and it can feel like there's so many steps just to get to point A, it's like point A, point 1, 2, 3, so any thoughts?
Yeah. So when I'm in advising sessions or success coaching sessions with my students, I try not to talk about myself too much, obviously because it's about them. But every once in a while, like a little storytelling helps quite a bit. So I had a student that didn't do well in a couple semesters of classes, and she just thought, like, she also had some housing insecurity, but kicked out for her, all that good stuff. And she was starting to get connected with some resources, but was still feeling really down about her like semesters that she did poorly in. And I was like, girl, and I sent her my some screenshots of my like that little chart that I had on my TED Talk with my bad grades. And I sent her screenshots of like failed semester, and I was like, and I'm in grad school now, I'm getting ready to graduate. I said it can take a long time. I said, but you keep at it and you can get there. And I think just seeing like real life examples, and luckily we have so many wonderful stories of students like on our college campus that have been successful, and students like Elazar who are knocking out their goals really quickly. And so it's always nice to be able to like point to someone else and say like, look, this the student had the same problem and now they're excelling. So sometimes those success stories help quite a bit.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, so I think with that, giving that piece of hope, so you're talking about giving hope, starting somewhere. So when you were talking about earlier just how overwhelming it is, I think to me that's safety planning. So thinking about what are the steps that we start with and breaking it down, and then going piece by piece and coming up with the student with the plan that they feel good about, and just talking through that can have such a powerful effect, and creating those kernels of hope, knowing that there are steps that are going to be taken, and that there's things that can be done. So I think safety planning is so important. Also making sure, their immediate safety, not just housing, but are they thinking of hurting themselves? Are they depressed? Making sure that they're safe is so critical, not just on the housing piece, but for their persons too.
Yeah, Tim, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think one of the pieces that we talk about with the 7 life domains is all of the intersections, right? Next month is our health and mental health month. But I'm curious, your role is unique in that you are doing therapeutic work in a post-secondary space, also with a community organization, so you're wearing a lot of hats, and probably know a lot of people, but just kind of from your experience, what are some of the other domain areas that professionals really need to be attuned to when working with a student that might be experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity?
Well, I think, like you mentioned, health and mental health. So housing is a foundational need. Think about the hierarchy of needs: housing and food, and those things on the bottom, and then above that, health and mental health. But they interact with each other, and so if housing is not there, how is the student doing emotionally? Probably not very well. And so making sure that they have that support too. What are the resources, the supports that they have, right? So they might not be housing supports, but do they have social supports? Who can they talk to? Really trying to expand those networks beyond just professionals, right? So professional supports are amazing and important, but also making sure there's more natural supports too. So figuring out who those people are and making sure they're connected. All the needs play off each other, and so so employment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to maintain employment if you don't have a place to live.
Yeah.
And so making sure that we're thinking of all those things.
Absolutely. And Shante, this was a piece that I thought you so eloquently and simply, I was like, how did she do that so well, spoke about in your own experience in your TED Talk, where you were like, and here's how the spiral happened, And so I'm wondering if you have any, other thoughts to add to that, just kind of how the domains interact, and when the housing piece is unstable, what else might be going?
Yeah, one of my, so Dave said a lot of the things that I was thinking as well, as far as health and employment and all those pieces. But when I used to work at a runaway homeless youth shelter in Flint, one of the domains at the time, I didn't know about the domains, but we did a lot of life skills work, and we were partly required to for a grant that we had, but also I really thought that was really important, because I think some of our residents, they would get really caught up in thinking like, well, I don't have a car, I don't have transportation. I'm like, well, we have a bus system and it's awesome. So teaching, students how to use that. I have some students now too that will Uber someplace before they'll take the bus, and I'll show them look how much this, I'm trying to find a really good chart right now, so if anyone knows them, send it to me, but that shows how expensive it is to use something like Uber as opposed to having your own car, as opposed to taking public transportation. So I think just some of those life skill pieces have always been something I've always tried to stress when working with students that are experiencing housing insecurity, because when you feel confident about some of those other areas, it doesn't fix the housing certainly, and but it can help you feel like you can navigate and manage a little bit more.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that piece at the end. When you feel confident about some of those areas, it doesn't fix it, but it can help it manage more. And I think that's probably true. You can switch any domain, but I think especially with housing, because there's so much that is dependent on external factors, it can feel really hard to feel like you're making any headway, feel like you have any control. So what are other areas that you can have control, that you can be healthy, that you can make headway? So that's great.
And I think too with resilience, so both the students talking about resilience, each person's level of resilience is different, but at a certain point, stressors add up, and so being able to take some of those stressors off and feel like, okay, I have that. Targeting these different domains and helping where we can is just so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the two of you students said something about naming. Elazar, you said naming your difficulties, and when you said that, I was like, that's so brilliant. I think it's a simple thing, and yet it does go so far. Nobody knows where you need help if you don't say, hey, I'm struggling with this area, or I need help, or I don't understand, and so naming some of those things, and then in turn, naming those strengths. Where am I doing well? Where am I succeeding? Where can you maybe help somebody else? So there's, sort of give and take, and you kind of feel like it's reciprocal.
So. And then also kind of planning really goes into that, because it's like, I think if you ask anyone who's been successful, they may have had an initial plan to begin with, but nothing really ever goes according to plan. So you have to have like contingencies upon contingencies for that. So like when I applied to the University of Michigan, like I had like a plan for, okay, I might apply to EMU or a couple other colleges in case I don't get in, but I got in. So it's just like, I mean, you just have plans, and then if those plans don't work out, you have other plans. But it's like if you only have one plan and then that fails, that's when you kind of like, you feel crushed because you don't have or see the light to go anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the planning on planning is great. I'm gonna use that. Like, are you planning on planning? I'm planning. Like, let's get to like maybe, you know, plan E here so that we have lots of plans. Did I catch that you will be transferring to the University of Michigan? That is super exciting. Congratulations. Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, having those plans. You know, and there's a lot of planning to be done, but making sure that you're kind of looking at the big picture. Yeah. Bree, do you have anything to add?
I think the planning on planning is a great way. I think for me, I don't know if I look at it as planning on planning. I look at it as, wow, so many options. I've never had this many opportunities, so I'm going to take them all. But like now that you've named and described it as planning on planning on planning on planning, in my head, I'm like, so many opportunities. I want it all, so I'm just going to go everywhere. So I think you naming that like made me feel better. I'm like, wow, maybe I am planning. So I think just adding on, when you have those opportunities, grabbing them, and some opportunities I really don't know what I'm going to do with yet, but I'm like, I'll put it in my back pocket for later. So just taking advantage of all the opportunities that are available to you, even if you like think that you won't need them at that point, because you never know.
And I would guess that the same kind of goes with people, right? Like, as you're networking, as you're meeting people, you know, okay, that person does this, and maybe I don't need that right now, but that doesn't mean that I should be like, forget about you. Like, you know, you can kind of, okay, keep their number, their email, hang on to it so that you know, you never know when you need it. Yeah, right. For sure. Any other questions? Yes.
I was just gonna say, in working with like some of my teens, that are like 16, 17, it's tough at times engaging, and especially engaging around something around education and the importance of it. And I know you kind of touched on some things, like I think oftentimes they feel very behind, and so they kind of get to a space where they're like, well, what's even the point of me putting in effort because I'm already so far behind. So not to get too personal with you both, but I don't know if like you experienced any like struggles, you know, in terms of education, like during your high school time, and if you had any advice for those of us that are working, you know, one-on-one with those students. And I've had, you know, touches, of course, on higher ed and opportunities out there, but it's very hard for my students in the moment right now to see those opportunities and see them as attainable, when right now they're really struggling just in their high school time to get that high school diploma. And so sometimes we've talked a lot about expression and demeanor and how you present, and how sometimes teachers in classrooms interpret their expressions a certain way, like they just don't care about school, when really my students are telling me, well, I do care, but outwardly they're not always showing that, or it's not coming across that way. So people are making assumptions about how they feel. And so I don't know if you have any advice for those young people that we work with, and that we want to see succeed, but are having a hard time just kind of seeing that light at the end.
So for me, like school was, like I like to go to school because I didn't want to be home most of the time, so that can be a place for students sometimes. But like, so in high school, for the most part, I was a kid who got like 5 A's and an F. Like that was basically because it's like there's one class you're supposed to try, and I didn't really want to try, and the other ones it was kind of like a breeze. And then so for me, because I grew up speaking like 2 other languages, so I was not that good at English. So for me, it was English. Like I was failing English. And then like when I got to college, I had to start like at the bottom class, like the most bottom, like basically like almost, it felt like ABCs. So, and then I kind of had to build my way up to the college level. So I mean, it's a process, but for me, what kind of like pushed me through the process was I kind of like looked around because I would hang out like with some friends and then I'd look at like their parents and then like their parents are in their 40s or 50s and they're still working their butt off but not making that much money and they're not really going to school. They didn't go to school and they're telling us like, please go to school. So that for me was kind of the motivation behind it because like I don't mind working a lot when I'm older, but if I'm gonna work a lot when I'm older, I want it to like pay dividends. I want it to be worth it. I don't want to work like 50, 60 hours a week and then barely be able to pay my rent. So it's just kind of like, I seen that as it's a time investment. So it's just like and then some people think about like, oh, I want to have fun now and then I'll work later. But it's just like, if you put it in now, it's kind of like you're investing in yourself. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to really explain that to a teenager in a sense, but if you can figure that way out and kind of just show them maybe examples from their lives or stuff like that, but not in like a mean way. So it's just like you just show them. That's
I think going off them, I think it's showing could also be assisting. So maybe the teacher's making these assumptions of your student and you're like, this isn't how my student is. Maybe setting up a meeting and going with the student to kind of explain, because like you said, your student tells you because they trust you and they know that you're there to support them, how they actually are feeling and that they do care. Maybe they don't feel those same feelings with that teacher. So just assisting and supporting them and just being there for them, saying like, do you need me to go with you? Like, what is something that I could do to help you so you can show your teacher you care? And then 16-year-olds suck. I sucked as a 16-year-old. I'm sorry, teenagers are gross. And so I think just remembering that, like, to make you feel like the work that you're doing is still valid, like, teenagers suck. I don't know, I was a terrible teenager, I can imagine, I don't even know. So just remembering that, like, not all of it's you, some of it's literally just teenagers, like, that's how they are. And then another thing I want to add that I think can kind of be beneficial is just, like he talks about his subjects that he wasn't good at was English. So me, I got like D's in math all through high school. For me, that D was okay because I was like, man, I'm passing. Like I'm doing good and I'm not doing that bad. So I think maybe instead of thinking about the highest A grade in the class, just like saying like, do you think it's possible for you to get the passing C or the D or the whatever, and assisting them to do that. Because I think sometimes when people are like failing, like for me, when I was failing, I'm like, I couldn't see any light because I was already at the bottom. And so for my instructors and my teachers were like, well, we can still get you to pass level. Like there's still light because you can still hit that level. And assisting as a counselor, like, do you need to stay after my office? Is there a tutoring session you can go to? Using those resources, again, like we talked about, and then really just assisting in as much time that you have. I know there's not a lot of time and there's a lot of students, but just making the effort to be personable and say like, I can go with you. I can set something up. And I can help because they obviously trust you and believe that you care for them. So.
One more thing.
Yeah.
So also it goes into like, especially in high school, is that not all teachers are created equally. So it's kind of like there are some teachers who it's easier to learn from, and then depending on the individual, people have different learning styles and they may not be able to pick up the information from that teacher. So sometimes it's hard for a youth to relate that they don't really understand the subject, or they may need a tutor, because sometimes there can be like a negative connotation or idea behind actually getting a tutor when there's not really a problem with that, because everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses. So sometimes they just need a little bit of assistance in that area, but they don't really know how to ask. So.
Thank you, guys. I know we're at time, but I can't let it go without asking the big question, which I always like to ask at the end of these panels. If you could, wave a magic wand and change one thing, or add a resource, or change a policy, add a new policy, do something in the housing domain to help support students that have experienced foster care and homelessness or homelessness, what would it be? And I will let you choose who wants to go first, because it's a big question, so you might not, some of you may have something at the top of your head, some of you may need to think about it.
Well, so if I talking magic wand.
Yeah, magic wands, man, like, the whole Disney.
Housing, I think, should be right, and so that would be the magic wand. It wouldn't be a question of we try and do their best to piece together a plan, there would be the resources in place to make sure that everybody had housing. Not just students, but everybody. And so I think in our country, we have the resources that we should be able to do that. So that would be my magic wand.
Dave stole it. But so I guess if I had to do something else aside from that, I would like to give students as much access to social capital as they possibly could have, which is something that we can sort of do. Just because I think that like this has come up several times throughout here, is it's like not what you know, it's who you know. And there's a lot of ways to get around a lot of policies if you know the right people. And I remember when I was a student and after I failed all those semesters of classes and I was going back to school and I was so scared of like, you know, trying to get back in and doing all the appeals I had to do. And I just thought that the odds were stacked against me. And now I work as academic advisor and it's like routine. Like I must, you know, I do those things for students over and over again all throughout the day. But when I was a student, I didn't recognize like what those systems looked like. But when students have like access to more social capital and they're working with someone, whether it's like a parent that's calling the dean on their behalf when something goes wrong, or if it's a college coach or another kind of advocate or advisor that they're working with. Like those things just feel so manageable when you have someone that's like really in your corner. So it's very helpful.
And I love that. I think the social capital is huge. And we all play, that's something that we can all do. It's actionable right now. You know, we can just commit to, I'm going to share this knowledge with the students in my life and be able to show up consistently. Yeah. How about the two of you?
So for me, I would go with, it's kind of education, because for me, I feel like education is power, but if you know what homelessness entails and it's known that it's on such a broad spectrum, that it's hard to ignore it. And then it kind of becomes more of a public issue, and then more people will be invested into it. So if more people know, then more people can help. But if people don't know that couch surfing or other aspects are considered to be homeless, then that's kind of why it gets ignored. So it's just, I'd say like education abroad as to what homelessness actually means.
That's great. Absolutely. And I think that that's something that we can all be better about, really just being mindful of like when I say homeless, I mean this, this, and this, you know, so people kind of go, oh, okay, it's not just, you know, somebody maybe living on the street, it's a whole variety of experiences.
I think for me, it would probably be more funding to support, but I also think it would be more funding to pay and recognize the hard work that people in this field do. Because I think if you were being paid for the work that you do and the lives that you save, more people would want to be a part of this field. I have plenty of friends who are like, oh, the work you do is so great, it must take a special type of human. I'm like, what do you mean? A normal person? Like I don't, so I think a lot of times the negative connotation with the amount of money that you're paid for the very great work that you do, I think sometimes can hold those who want to be a part of this field back. But I think not only funding for housing, but funding for those who do the hard work that it takes.
Mm-hmm. And I should say that Bree is graduating in just a couple months here with her BSW. So she is one of those people who wants to be the pupil. So she's speaking on behalf of her profession. So that's awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you guys for joining us for the panel today. This has been awesome. Thank you to all of you for your questions. Thank you to everybody out there. We're going to take a break and we will resume in just a few minutes.